Greg Barnes is a barrister and national president of the Australian Lawyers Alliance, and he joins us now from Hobart. Good morning, Mr. Barnes. Thanks for your time. In your view, who's to blame for people smugglers being granted refugee status and then setting up smuggling rings in Australia?
Well, firstly, Karina, it's important to note that at this stage these are allegations and they haven't been tested in any courts. And I don't say that as a matter of glibness, but media make allegations, they're then investigated and examined, and people are entitled to have their day in court, and I don't want to prejudice that by assuming guilt. The second point I'd make, though, is, of course, that people smuggling is inevitable. It is inevitable because both sides of politics in this country refuse to allow more asylum seekers into Australia and allow them into Australia in a humane and compassionate way. People smugglers, in a sense, are a reaction to the failure of the official regulatory regime, which means that people languish for years and years and years in areas where they are near to persecution. And until both political parties in this country liberalise the regime of allowing asylum seekers and more asylum seekers to come to Australia, you will get people smuggling.
We'll get onto the politics of the situation in just a moment, but how do you think various authorities from the AFP to the Department of Immigration didn't know that events like these may be taking place?
Well, as I say, I mean, it's a bit like the war on drugs in a way. When you set up an impossible system, people will slip through. I'd be surprised if there weren't people smugglers who'd come to Australia, because the system itself is broken, and the point I just made to you earlier, I think, demonstrates that. It's the same in relation to drugs policy. If you pursue hopeless policies which are based on fear and, in this case, xenophobia, you will get people seeking to take advantage of the system. And I don't know, these people, as I say, are entitled to have, if there are any proceedings, entitled to have their day in court, and I'm not going to prejudice that. But what I am going to say is that if governments want to pursue these wrong-headed, fear-driven policies, it is inevitable that people will slip through the cracks, as may have happened in this case and happens in other cases.
Let's just stay with the AFP response for a moment. I just want to take you through the statement the Australian Federal Police released last night.
Sure.
It says that it treats people smuggling very seriously, and it's committed to targeting those who organise, participate in and benefit from people smuggling activities in Australia and overseas. It says it would not be appropriate for the AFP to comment further on operational activity, intelligence and methodologies, as it may jeopardise ongoing matters. The AFP said that since September 2008, 14 alleged organisers have been arrested and 5 organisers have been sentenced to up to 7 years imprisonment. Are you worried that the AFP might be chasing the wrong targets when it comes to people smugglers? We know of young Indonesians, sometimes just fishermen, that have been prosecuted for people smuggling offences.
Again, Karina, and I'll use the comparison of drugs. Police agencies and the legal system is full of low-hanging fruit, so that law enforcement agencies can go out and say, we are winning the battle, when of course they're not, because it's very easy to pick on vulnerable, impoverished young Indonesian fishermen, which, by the way, both sides of politics support mandatory sentencing of these poor young innocent people, and allow the operators of people smuggling syndicates to go free, as happens with drugs. As I say, it is really easy when a policy doesn't work to just go for low-hanging fruit, and I think that's what happens in this case.
I know you don't want to talk about whether in fact people are guilty of this act or not, but the Four Corners program revealed 6 people that they investigated over the course of about 7 weeks. Do you think that this practice may be more widespread?
I have no idea, but I would be surprised that given the incentives which have been created by the opposition and the government in this country for people to take grave risks, I would be surprised if there weren't more people.
Are you worried that this is likely to further demonise genuine asylum seekers who come to Australia by boat?
Well, what you're going to see today will be a predictable reaction. Already Scott Morrison, the Liberal spokesman, has already been out and will be out again today on this. They will say, and the tabloid media will say, see, this is what happens. You can't let any of these people in because if they're not terrorists, they're people smugglers. It is important to remember that over 90% of people, in fact, higher than that, almost 100% of those who come to this country come here because they want a better life and they are genuine refugees. They are then caught up in a political football, and they are demonised by elements of the media and by politicians for their own ends. And it's important that this not be allowed to happen. And the problem with stories like last night, and I in no way criticise Four Corners, it's a public interest story, but the problem is that they get used then by unscrupulous politicians, particularly those on the right, who then seek to whip up a fear and xenophobia. And you watch, that's what will happen over the next week.
Greg Barnes, thanks for your time from Hobart.
Thanks, Karina.